It is officially 1:02, so I will officially start our program. So thank you to everyone who is joining us today. We may still get some more people trickling in. Make sure I can navigate here. So thank you all for joining today, and we hope you are safe. And I just wanted to start by mentioning that while our focus for the next 45 minutes or so is going to be on dolphin science, our thoughts obviously continue to be with all of those working to combat COVID-19 and systemic injustice in our societies. So I will be monitoring our chat. Make sure you pop your questions in there as we go. You can select everyone, or you can select Dolphin Communication Project. I will see them either way. And remember that we're recording, so keep those microphones off. You probably want to keep your video off. And we're also giving away an electronic Adopt a Wild Dolphin kit, which we usually do on Tuesdays. So if you want to be entered into today's drawing, put your email address in that chat. Again, you can select Dolphin Communication Project if you want it to be private. And away we go. So I'm going to start today by introducing our amazing dolphin nerd panel that we have today. We have with us Dr. Diana Reiss. She is a cognitive psychologist and a marine mammal scientist. She's, I don't know where she is on your computers. Diana, if you want to wave. She is the director of the Animal Behavior and Conservation MA and certificate programs in the psychology department at Hunter College of the City University of New York. I bet you get sick of writing all of those letters and words out. Her research has focused on dolphin cognition and communication through studies in aquariums and in the field. And I thought I would just pop up there. She's the author of The Dolphin in the Mirror, Exploring Dolphin Minds and Saving Dolphin Lives. So if you have questions
for the plug, Kelly.
Today, yeah, always, about mirror recognition, what does that even mean? Her work with underwater keyboard and touch screens, all sorts of stuff she can share with us today. We also have Dr. Deirdre Yeater. If you want to wave, Dee. Dee is a professor at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. Her research interests are in comparative psychology and animal behavior. She began studying dolphins 19 years ago, and DCP is very lucky to have Dee lead field courses to our Bimini, Bahamas field site, and we also collaborate on several other research projects. And we have Dr. Maria Maust-Mohl, who is currently an associate professor of psychology at Manhattan College. She teaches courses in cognition and biological psychology. Her research focuses on animal behavior and communication, and some of her current projects include working on data from the bottlenose dolphins here in Bimini. So sometimes we get to work together too. Then you know the DCP team, but just to be sure, in case we have anybody new today, we have Dr. Kathleen Dudzinski. She is the founder and director of DCP. She founded DCP in 2000 with a lot of dolphin research already under her belt, and she is the co-author of Dolphin Mysteries. You can learn lots about her research interests in past webinars and publications on the DCP page, including communication and pectoral fin contact. And then this is a official photograph of Dr. Justin Gregg. He is a senior research associate and vice president here at DCP. He is an adjunct professor at St. Francis Xavier University. Hopefully I'm saying that right. He is interested in linguistics and the evolution of human language and dolphin social cognition. And he is the author of 2 fairly different books, I would say, maybe. I mean, same topic, dolphins, but Are Dolphins Really Smart? And 22 Fantastical Facts About Dolphins. He is also the host of DCP's podcast, The Dolphin Pod. And then there's me. I will be chiming in here and there and monitoring the chat. I manage DCP's research of Atlantic spotted dolphins and bottlenose dolphins off Bimini, which is a little tiny island in the Bahamas. But my street cred among the younger listeners today is that I got to be on an episode of The Wildcrats. but I did not get my own cartoon. So, someday. So with that, we have some interesting questions already coming in. I think maybe we will start with Diana. Can we start with you? What is the difference between intelligence and cognition? Is it just people disagreeing over different words to say the same thing?
Well, they're really related, obviously. When we think about cognition, we're talking about how we process information, okay, whether we're humans or other animals, and how we problem solve, how we perceive the world, how we categorize things. That's what we mean by cognition. And we use cognition's part of our everyday life. We don't do anything without processing information. Intelligence is that kind of slippery term where there's not absolutely one agreed upon definition. And, I'll tell you my favorite definition of intelligence is, it was put forth by somebody, a man named Ross Ashby, and he said it's the power of appropriate selection. And I've always liked that because it's sort of independent whether it's in a human being, a non-human animal, or a machine. How good are they at selecting appropriate things? So that kind of feels comfortable for me. So they're obviously related terms, but different.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add to that? I think I always thought of it like humans are obsessed with knowing how intelligent we are and ranking ourselves, but that it's not that easy across species.
Yeah, just to add one thing. So if we think about it, what might be super intelligent for a human in terms of what we've mastered may not be even relevant for a dolphin. And dolphins can outshine us in many things, you know, obviously, and we do things better than dolphins. So we're land-based, they're aquatic. So we have to think of the environment an animal evolves in to think about intelligence too. That's real important.
While we're on the comparison topic, we'll hit up Justin. Can you fill us in on the difference between communication and language and which ones dolphins have?
Yeah, that's always my favorite subject. Communication can kind of mean anything in the sense that cells communicate with other cells. As long as information is being transmitted from one thing to another, that's communication. And so when we study animal communication, we're studying what information dolphins, for example, are giving to other dolphins, and all animals would communicate. Language is kind of hard to define, really. Generally, we think of it as something that only humans do, although if you extend that definition, you have more complex information that an animal could transmit to another animal, which you could label as language. But according to like the kind of formal definition that I like, language is that thing that allows humans to communicate about this huge variety of topics. We can map on all these abstract and concrete meanings using grammatical structures to convey essentially a limitless amount of information about different subjects. So the question is, do dolphins have something like a language in their natural communication system? It's difficult to answer. There isn't evidence really that they can communicate all the different kinds of things that we can as language users, but certainly they can be taught, like Diana has worked on this sort of stuff, so she can probably talk more about it, but they can be taught to use symbols in complicated ways, which is very much language-like.
So the fact that my husband, my family, my friends all say that I talk a lot and my answers are always too long and I never stop talking is because I have language.
Yeah, although I'm sure you could probably pull that off without language too. If I have faith in you.
So intelligence, cognition, communication, language, are there senses that dolphins have that humans don't have? I guess that could go to anybody who wants to snag that one.
We all jump in.
We're looking at you, Kathleen.
Well, I think anybody can jump in as well, but I think part of that is one of the senses that I would say is echolocation. most people don't have echolocation. There is some indication that maybe someone who's blind might be able to use sound reflections, but that's different than echolocation. They have the same other senses for the most part. Maybe the sense of smell is a bit off, at least in the fully aquatic animals. But when it comes to echolocation, I'd say that's considered a sense that we don't have, and that's emitting sounds to be able to identify or localize to items, prey or other items in the environment, and then you get a response back. So echolocation would be similar to looking at a flat, calm pond and throwing a rock in it and seeing the ripples that go out. And then if there's a boulder or a tree, it'll send a reflection back. And that gives you sort of a visual of what echolocation would be. I don't know if anybody else would like to jump in there.
Well, I think one of the things that's super cool that's been shown by 2 different labs many years ago is that dolphins can actually seem to integrate their echolocation with vision. It's called cross-modal perception. So when they did a study where they showed dolphins objects underwater, they had to make a choice. They could identify those objects in air that they had only gotten acoustic images or acoustic pictures of, we think. And that suggests that they can translate that. And what's particularly interesting is that from studies of the dolphin brain, they're seeing that the visual center in the dolphin brain and the acoustic center are next to each other in the brain. It's called adjacency. That's the fancy term. And that's different than what we see in our brains. So it's pretty interesting to start thinking about these dolphins that are really social and they have big brains. And even though their brains are organized, they're organized differently than ours. They share a lot of our abilities. And then there are all these things we may have no idea about yet. And that's what makes it so exciting to be a marine mammal scientist. All those unknowns.
And for that cross-modal, I just blanked on the second word in that phrase. Is that the idea, so from humans, especially for our younger listeners, the idea that if I use my eyes and I look at an apple on my table, I know that that's an apple. But if I'm blindfolded and someone hands me an apple, that I can probably figure out that that's an apple just by using touch. And I didn't need my vision to gain that information.
The same as like smelling a rose and seeing a rose. You're using 2 senses to get information, and they match one another, but they're somewhat different. That's a pretty fair assessment, right, Diana or Justin?
Yeah. You know, there's a really fun game that for anybody who wants to try this with your friends, if you put a bunch of different items in a paper bag or a plastic bag, and you give it to one of your friends and say, just by touching it, can you feel what it is? And you can put really weird objects in and see how good they are with that. We're really good at it, but it gives you a sense of that cross-modal.
And you can take that a little further at Halloween.
I was just going to say at Halloween, peeled grapes, really.
Yeah, their eyeballs. Are they grapes?
Yep.
You mentioned the brain. So this could also go to anybody who feels comfortable. But given the brain is a massive consumer of oxygen, so I guess we're starting with the assumption, correct us if we're wrong, that the brain requires a lot of oxygen and is sensitive to oxygen deprivation. It's sensitive to not getting enough. Does that have something to do with why the dolphins have evolved a relatively large brain?
I don't understand your question.
Maybe I filled in too much stuff. If the brain uses a lot of oxygen, is that why the brain needs to be so big? I know there's a lot of debate on why the dolphin's brain is the size that it is. Does it have to do with oxygen use? I guess is the question.
I haven't heard the oxygen
use, I haven't heard that one.
But there's a very controversial and probably very wrong hypothesis that the dolphin brain grew that large to help them with heat generation, to keep them warm in cold waters. And that's really the only and best explanation for the size of their brain. I do not think the evidence for that is particularly strong. I think most people here would agree that dolphin brains are big because they need them for thinking. Complex social cognition is necessary. There's a relationship between sizes of brain and the size of social complexity in an animal's world. So that is probably the leading hypothesis as to why brains are so big in dolphins. And they are abnormally big for their size.
Thank you. We have a question from Jeremy, who's 6, and he's wondering, maybe Dr. Maria could take a stab at this one. How do dolphins click and whistle?
Sure, good question. And kind of goes back, I think, to the sensory question as well. I was going to chime in, but we switched questions just about how. No, it's okay. But I can kind of tie it in here in the sense that, you know, dolphins do see and hear, but they also see differently than we do because they live in the aquatic environment, and some of the signals that they produce are at different frequencies. So we talk about frequencies as being high in the echolocation range, for example, or really high ultrasonic frequencies that are beyond our hearing. And then the lower frequencies can also go beyond our hearing, and that can vary depending on maybe some of the meaning of those signals. But in terms of how dolphins produce sounds, there is, I think, pretty good consensus these days on the sound production coming from within their blowhole. So if you think about what the dolphin head looks like, they have the blowhole on top. That is where they breathe from, but there are air sacs and muscles that make up that pathway that they can generate sounds from that place. And there are 2 sets of air sacs, and it seems like they can use both of those air sacs within the passageway for producing clicks and whistles as well. And I think there's also some speculation that they might also use a larynx, vocal cords of sorts, but I think there's still questions about that. And I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in as well.
The only thing I would add is that most of those sounds go out through the melon, which is the forehead, and the skull is sort of curved in, so it's called concave, but the melon sort of sits on that and acts, I guess you could say, as a lens, so that the sounds go through the melon into the environment, and then they receive those sounds through their lower jaw, and both the lower jaw and the melon are filled with a material that has the same density as seawater. So the sounds go out and come back without that much bending.
Thank you. We'll switch to some social questions. I don't know if Dee wants to grab this one. Why do dolphins often swim in sync or together? And does this have something to do with their bond?
Yeah, definitely it has to do with their bond. So they tend to be more synchronous swimming in closely associated dolphins. So if they have a strong bond or friendship, or if it's a mother and a calf, they tend to have more synchronous behavior. They have a lot of synchronous surfacings that have been recorded for mom calves, and how many seconds they're apart, and this maybe could give us like an association pattern if we're studying a large group of animals. They tend to do things in unison as well. So sometimes it appears that animals are doing something in unison, but they're actually coordinating underwater. I know this kind of gets into that idea of copying each other. So maybe there's one leader, and then another dolphin may be copying a couple split seconds later what that initial dolphin is doing. So sometimes they're not in perfect synchrony, but there is one animal that may be leading the behavior and the others are kind of copying within a couple seconds.
Thank you.
That's one way to think about it.
With these dolphin bonds, do dolphins have the same mate for life for a long time? Do dolphins get married? Do they have boyfriends and girlfriends? We have some viewers wondering that. No, who wants to grab that one?
The easiest answer is no. Not that we know of. And dolphins, they use contact and a variety of other behaviors to strengthen their bonds, but they have a fission-fusion society, much like what humans have, or chimps or other individuals, and they'll have smaller groups that will have a certain number or identification of individuals together. And then those all small groups might come together for a socializing event or a foraging or feeding event. And then they might separate out and either be in the same groups as before or in different groups from before for individuals. But there's no marriage that we've identified in dolphins. They probably have best friends. In fact, we do know that some male bottlenose dolphins have best friends for life in some populations, not in all, but in some. And we don't know if that's true for all of the other dolphins. But there's still some complexity that we're learning. I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in. I could probably talk for hours about some more of the details.
Kathleen, now that because you're talking about buddies, the dolphins have affiliations. You've done all this work on pectoral fin rubbing. I wonder if maybe you could talk a little bit more about that. What you found.
Sure. Do you want to be here for another 5 or 6 hours?
Sure.
Well, what we have found is that dolphins use their pec fins to make contact with one another. And I have here. Well, I'll step out one sec. I have this.
Is she going to bring a dolphin?
Yep. No, I forgot. I had my dolphin figurines that I wanted to show, so I had to step out really quick because I have video that I can show, but it works if you show 2 dolphins. I have a spotted dolphin right here, and I have a bottlenose dolphin right here. And with their pec fin, it's when one dolphin's flipper comes into contact with another dolphin's body, like that, or a body swims up and rubs against the pec fin. That's kind of what we're talking about with flipper as well. And I missed what Justin said, so he might have made some funny comment about me or sipping off. But
good guess.
But I'm gonna show my video for one sec because I have a clip up here that will show some of these, and I can talk about it. And this clip, and I'll play this. This is, I believe, Champ and Stan and several other individuals, and you can see. Hopefully, you can still hear me.
Yep.
And there's pec fin contact. You can see here and down here and right here where the dolphins are sharing contact. And what we've seen is that younger males will share pec fin contact with a variety of other young males. And then as they age, they're going to share that pec fin contact specifically and more with one older individual. And so when they're younger, they seem to be using pec fin contact to sort of figure out who they're going to share those friendships with. And so they're using pec fin contact as a way to first set up and establish those friendships and then to maintain them. And what we've also found is that this contact is used mostly among non-kin, so among friends. Kin or dolphin in family members, they don't really use pec fin contact. It's kind of like, I don't, when I was growing up, I didn't have to shake hands with my sisters every day. They probably would have, been irritated with me if I tried to do that. So
Leave me alone.
Yes.
Well, I think that's a nice segue into dolphin play. And I say that because to me, it also looked like those dolphins in that clip were kind of trying to play with your snorkeling fins. I don't know if that's what was happening. So does anybody want to share either personal observations where you've seen dolphins playing or why they play? And then I have a little video of some seaweed play I can show.
Do you want to show that first? I have one from dolphins in an aquarium playing, but we could do that after you do seaweed play.
Awesome. So let me just make sure I can figure out how to share my screen again. All right, so these are spotted dolphins off Bimini. This is Inca. She has a little damaged fin. Her right pectoral fin is a little bit damaged. And this is a slightly older female V. And they're just playing with some natural seaweed. Specifically, it's called sargassum. And sometimes they play with it on their own. They move it between their fins. And sometimes their V had just passed it to Inca. So now Inca has it on her pectoral fin. And it's not an accident. They didn't just accidentally swim into this seaweed and not care that it's there. It seems to be a very purposeful choice to play with it, buzzing it, grabbing it with their rostrum, their pec fin. And we see them doing this, like I said, on their own and together. So we would call this solo play if they're playing on their own with the seaweed, or mutual play if they're playing with a buddy with the object. Here in Bimini, we choose not to play the game with them because we want to be observing their wild, natural behaviors. And we also don't want them to get too comfortable with that act of humans reaching out. So we just want to kind of keep our hands at our sides or on our cameras and enjoy watching them play. So hopefully that ended. And if anyone else wants to say something about play, or Diana, you said you had video too?
Yeah, I just want to say, so when we also do our field studies with DCP, and Daisy Kaplan, who unfortunately isn't with us today, was a student in my lab, and we started that program, and it's still going on, and now Maria's involved, and it's just a wonderful program. And I think that this idea of not reaching out is wonderful, and I just salute you guys for the approaches you take, because it is when you're out there recording them underwater and they come up and they're curious and they're watching you, and we're trying to keep them natural as possible out there. And sometimes they will come by and try to drop a seaweed right in front of you, but we go by the rules, and we all like to do that. And I just want to thank you for taking that approach. I think that's really wonderful, and we're happy to do that. Yeah, I have a quickie I'll show you. So for many years, I've been working with dolphins in aquariums. Now we're doing more field work in Bimini and in Belize. And can you see this screen?
You have to share your screen.
Oh, I didn't share it yet. I'm sorry. I thought I just did.
Okay.
So, all right, just a minute. I have a couple of them, so I was just going to show you these. Let me share my screen, and then we will. Okay, I'll be right there.
Now it's queuing up.
And now you're okay. Now we should be. Hold on. Too many screens in front of me. Okay, here we go. So this was at Marine World in California. This is a dolphin, Shiloh. Do you see what she's doing?
Ooh.
She's actually blowing a beautiful ring of air and following it up to the surface. And some of our colleagues, Ken Norris and Karen Pryor, who were leaders in our field for many years ago, they were some of the first people to study dolphin behavior, saw wild dolphins blowing these rings, these toruses of air, but they saw them when they were, believe it or not, captured in dolphin and tuna nets when dolphins got trapped. And we thought what perhaps was going on is they were scared, and as they got scared, instead of just releasing a big bubble of air, because it was coming out of their blowhole, it would tighten. Some people thought they might be signals. But in aquariums where the dolphins are fed and they're very playful, they started using these, and they started creating these beautiful rings of air. And it was this is another picture where the dolphin is blowing one ring, and then she blows another ring, it catches up with the first, and she swims through it. This is terrible video. It was my first day that I got my video camera, and it was back in the 80s. But it was the first time we really saw that even though we know animals play, and it's really benefits animals as they get older to play, it's what we call adaptive, it's good practice, we never saw a dolphin creating their own object of play out of something they produced from their body. So it was really fascinating to see this. Here's little Bailey at the National Aquarium in Baltimore that we were also studying. Now others have seen this. Bailey had no experience. She was born there, so we knew what she did. Do you see how she's blowing these bubble rings? The dolphin I showed you before was blowing it out of their blowhole at the top of their head, which is their nostrils. They breathe that way. She's doing it a different way. Can you see what she's doing?
Very cool.
She blows a little out of her blowhole, but then she's kicking it with her tail to make the ring. Watch this. And I think Stan Kuchai and some of the other folks that he worked with actually published this first. They saw a dolphin. We had shown how they blow these bubble rings, but then I think it was Stan Kuchai and his students actually saw another dolphin in another facility doing it with their tail, blowing it out of their blowhole, playing with their tail. And then many years later, we saw the same behavior. So these guys are really creative. They're non-handed, but they're still creative. So you don't have to be handed to be intelligent. You don't have to be handed to be manipulative. Dolphins manipulate things in their environment, and they do it. They manipulate their environment in all sorts of ways. Maybe we'll have more time to talk about that in a little bit too. So let me pass the screen back, or you guys can, there we go. Okay,
Nice.
it's all yours again.
Neat.
Very cool. Thank you. That maybe segues. I'm trying to find the segues between different questions. This one's kind of vague, so I'm not sure. I'm just going to read it as it was submitted. Can you talk about dolphin development from birth to adulthood? So there, in one of those clips, that was a calf playing. I had clips of the juvenile playing. We do still see adults playing. So I'm not sure if anyone wants to talk about the physical development, but then maybe also their social development from birth to adulthood.
Well,
I can talk
Okay,
about
little bit. You
calves.
guys
Oh, go ahead.
first. Yeah.
no, go ahead.
No,
Go ahead,
well,
Dee.
So, Dee, go ahead.
I was just going to talk a little bit about how calves and how they've been studied, you know, in both the wild and captivity, extensively looking at how much time they spend with the mother and then how much time they spend independently. Also, the types of swimming positions that the calves tend to spend. So looking at the age that they stop maybe in that nursing position where their heads are directly under the mother, and moving into the echelon position where maybe they're side by side, their flanks, their sides are next to the mother. They spend a lot of time like that. But then after that first few weeks of life, they do start to socialize more and get out there with more peers. So this is like social development, I guess I would say, not just physical development in terms of increasing the time they spend with other dolphins, mostly peers, but other individuals. And it also has to do with kind of the mothering style. So as the calves get older, they spend less and less time with the mother and more time exploring. And there have even been some studies looking at the social development with calves that have been adopted by other mothers that were not their own biological mother, and they had nursed them or provided milk for those babies, and they show the same development stages in terms of time of independence. So it appears that they're kind of normally developing, even though there are individual differences or different personalities within this. That's kind of a little bit about the calves and their development. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in and add. I know there are a bunch of us wanting to talk.
Kathleen, do you want to go next on that?
Sure. I think well, it depends on for what we've done is we look at the different age categories. So it's not, you know, if you have a human child, you would look at each year or maybe different developmental stages. And I would defer to all of you guys to chat about that because I don't have kids. But I've seen it for my nieces and nephews and from all of your kids. But for dolphins, we look at the age groups because when we want to do comparisons between what we know in managed care versus those in the wild, we have groups of, or the age groups that we can look at. So we might know when an animal is born in what year, but we might not know all the steps that they get to in terms of developmentally. There are various, in talking with different trainers and different caregivers, I know that there are some maturational milestones, meaning, you know, the first 3 months are critical in a dolphin calf's life, and then you get into the older calf before it's weaned and on its own. And then you have the juvenile groups. And in the Bahamas, we see a lot of juveniles and, you know, young animals that are no longer attached to mom, no longer needing all their sustenance from mom, which means they know how to hunt fish and catch their fish on their own, but they can hang out with other juveniles and play. And I think they can learn from one another in that case, as well as setting up who their friendships are going to be with and what they're going to do. And various different papers and research has shown that they tend to be more creative and innovative when they have other individuals of similar age in what they're, you know, when they do certain things. And that's also a time, I think, when they practice the different behaviors in play that they might need maybe when they get into sort of aggressive interactions as adults for whatever they might be, you know, competing for in that sense. So, which is pretty cool. I mean, we could go on, but I want to give somebody else a chance to talk
Thank
to.
you. Diana, did you still want to add something to that question?
Yeah, I just thought so a lot of the work we've done is on vocal learning, and Kathleen mentioned learning, and so did Dee. And we watched babies when they first started, right when they were born, the calves. I call them babies just because they were in our pool, but we call them calves. And we watched them develop, particularly for the first year. And we recorded with underwater microphones that we call hydrophones. And we found that they're not born echolocating. Kathleen was talking about echolocation before. That seems to develop. And what was interesting is that they seem to first touch objects. They're very playful, even in the first weeks of life. If you put a ball in the pool, often by the second week, they may be pushing it or playing with it. But they start to play with it, and then they start coming up to it with an open mouth, and you hear very low clicks. Now, in echolocation, they do broad band of frequencies, wide band clicks. So it has many of the different frequencies in any one click. But when babies start, they're very low. And then over time, they become shorter and higher in frequency. And so there's a changeover, and we don't know whether it has to do with the physiological changes and the developmental maturation of the system, or there's some imitative quality with what they're hearing with the adults. We simply don't know that. But what's funny is that bats also echolocate. And when you compare what dolphins do to bats, they show that same change. They start low and then they get higher. So that's interesting. But then dolphins learn their vocal signals. And there's just a handful of animals that are vocal learners. Most animals, if they're not listening to other animals, they don't learn those sounds. So we saw that young dolphins start changing, and they show babbling, and they start acquiring the sounds of some of the adults over time, like we do. So that's pretty interesting. And but dolphins, in terms of the echolocation, it doesn't really look like adult echolocation until a couple months later. So, but they are vocal learners, and that's important. They're unique. They're one of the unique species, yeah.
Cool. That was actually on our list. What does vocal learning mean? So thank you for filling in what that. No, that was perfect. Thank you. With you, we sort of touched on it, so I think it leads nicely. Someone is asking about the hot topic, the nice headline about whether or not dolphins give each other names. So I know, Diana, you've done some work on this. Maria, I'm not sure if your work overlaps with kind of signature whistles and why they might even do this. I will say this could be an hour-long webinar in and of itself. So to whichever, I apologize, I don't remember which participant asked this question. We'll kind of give a short synopsis on whether or not dolphins give each other names and what it means when we hear signature whistle in a big headline.
I'll just start with one clarification for those listeners who know about DCP's methodology and how we record data. We have our camera system has stereo audio into a video camera. And so what we're trying to do is record when individuals are interacting, and then also what sounds they're making. And so we can start to tell who's making those sounds. But because of that methodology, we have almost no data on potential signature whistles of the dolphins that we study. And I say that because over time, signature whistles have been identified as contact calls, which means that they would be using them mostly when they're out of visual range of other dolphins. And so early on in that whole debate with signature whistles, my data that I collected and what we continue to collect with DCP are underrepresented in those whistles because we're not identifying any specific whistle to a specific individual. And so when some of the more recent work came out and said, oh, they're probably contact calls and they do have these individual characteristics, that made more sense because it also justified or clarified for me why we wouldn't have them represented in our data.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. We were right in the middle of the debate. Brenda McCowan, who was a student in our lab and is now at UC Davis. So we started recording. So contact calls, again, the idea when I started was that the literature was saying that these were whistles, particular whistles that each individual animal produced, and they were generally repeated, and that they were very specific to the individual. And we've seen that in captivity. We see it repeatedly. clearly they have these contact type calls, and we don't know what is the actual nature. What does it represent? We think that it's been shown, and we've seen it as well, that dolphins can produce another dolphin's contact call. And I think Peter Tyack had shown that many years ago, and we've seen it as well. I think the question is there something else going on? And that's what we were starting to question, because we started finding that in the groups of animals that we studied that came from different populations in different areas, they were all producing what we saw as these Reiss kinds of calls, which didn't seem to be predicted. It was weird. And we tend to see this at National Aquarium as well. So the question is there something similar when you get with a group of animals in the calls they produce? In other words, do groups of animals possibly share aspects of their contact call? Is there something familial there? We talked today about affiliations. Animals that spend lots of time together, is there something that starts looking like a call that might represent the group they're with, an affiliation? So these are a lot of the questions we're looking at right now. I think we're all seeing what we're seeing. They do have these contact signature calls. What it means and how they function, and do they change? We're seeing some evidence that they are changing and that they can add things to their contact call, that they may be combinatorial, which we've seen some in other things. So it's a really fascinating time for all of us now that we have systems like Kathleen was describing, like others have used. We have one too where we can start localizing who's producing that signal. And that's going to really make us jump ahead a lot when we can say, this signal's coming from this dolphin, and then this dolphin does this signal, and we can watch them in these interactions. So it's really exciting for us now because our technology is allowing us to do more.
Thank you. I think that this is hosted by the Dolphin Communication Project. We've just talked a lot about how they produce their whistles, their clicks. We've talked about whether or not they have this signature whistle and what it really is and what it's for. If I can mimic yours, then what's the point if I could just trick you all into thinking I'm someone else? But someone is also, Malcolm on the call is also wondering if anyone here is studying human to dolphin, oh my gosh, I was gonna say the word wrong. Any telepathic communication between dolphin to dolphin or dolphin to humans. I think everyone here is looking into that. So I think we could maybe suggest that Malcolm look into other research. He feels as though he's experienced that himself, I think, but that's not anything that we're all studying dolphin to dolphin communication, whether or not that's vocal or tactile, like the pectoral fin contact that Kathleen was discussing.
For just a quick comment on that, for my perspective is I'm not sure what I would study, because that's getting at perception as well in terms of what one individual is perceiving from another individual. And I don't yet know how to study that in an unbiased way without someone having to tell me what they've received. And I think to me, what's really exciting about science is that we ask questions and the answers are really cool, but the answers allow us to clarify the questions we're asking. So 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we couldn't actually study emotion in other animals. We couldn't study personality in other animals, but now we have ways of studying those two topics in animals that we can't sit down and have a conversation with. I mean, I'd love to be able to have a conversation with my beagles, but their idea of conversation and mine are two different things. And, it might be the same, with other animals in terms of we now can assess some traits that the average person would say, oh yeah, they have emotion. Oh yeah, they have personality. But as a scientist, we didn't have the data that we could calculate and manipulate and run statistics on to give us an idea of what we had. And so I don't know that we have that yet for studying telepathy.
That leads nicely to another question, and I'm going to combine two, and hopefully it'll make sense. So one person did ask about how we even study emotion in non-human animals, and someone else asked if dolphins cry. So I don't know if anyone wants to to take on those two or just one of them. Maria, I know that you've studied hippos. I don't know. When I think of when I think of studies of non-human animal emotions, I not only think of dolphins, but I also think of elephants and work done with elephants. Maria, has anyone done that with hippos?
You know, there actually isn't very much known about hippos, which surprised me. It was a focus of my graduate work, and I was really interested in the communication questions. I did this work with Diana. But to my knowledge, there hasn't been a lot on the side of behavior. I think we know that there are affiliations between certain hippos that seem to be primarily kin related. There is some speculation that they might have strong social bonds between the females like elephants. The males seem to be a little bit more separate. But going back to the question about studying emotion, I think, like you were saying, Kathleen, as well, we have better tools to identify what could be more emotive and whether that's behavioral evidence. You mentioned elephants, Kel, and I think one thing that kind of comes to mind about elephants that hasn't been seen in hippos, at least, is like the grief, the mourning behaviors that they seem to show when they come across deceased elephants or the bones of elephants. They have a kind of ritual that seems to be performed. So we can use behavior as a way to try to indicate some of that. Also on the side of communication, I think we can look at patterns in vocalizations, maybe heightened intensity of a call, the loudness of a call, the increase in the frequency. Is it a higher pitch? If you think about when we're really excited, your voice goes up, a little bit more. Versus, the lower frequencies might be more aggressive. And so there's information that we can start to glean from that scientifically to try to, interpret a little bit more about what's going on, but it's inherently challenging because we don't know, really what they're feeling, but the combined information we can get from behavior, communication, and now hormone or brain activity tells us a lot more, I think, about those questions. But going back to hippos, there's definitely a lot to be determined yet.
And here's a little plug. I swear I didn't plan it. Is it next week? I have no sense of the calendar. In a week and a half or so, Maria will be back to tell us a bit about hippos and dolphins.
Oh.
So if you're curious about how they're related and how they've evolved, make sure to tune in to that talk. It'll be on our schedule.
I'm excited. Thanks.
Their emotions, our emotions, someone asked how swimming with dolphins, and I would take this to say even just being in close proximity to dolphins, how that maybe changed us and changed how we felt about them and ourselves. For me, I know I was 20. Well, I had seen dolphins in aquariums. I had seen whales and porpoises in the wild. But the first time I got to see the dolphins here in Bimini as a DCP intern, I was 20 years old, I think, and was just like exactly as Kathleen said, let your first time just be. Don't worry about your job. Don't worry about the rules of data collection. Just absorb it and let it be. And it was amazing. And I haven't lost that. And I find that sometimes, right, if you study dolphins, you're a scientist, but like, well, of course, everybody loves dolphins. But I think it's okay to like your job. I think it is okay to be excited by the species that you study. And I think I have the best of both worlds because I get to study the dolphins and do all my nerdy science stuff exactly in the box where I'm supposed to be. And I get to see people on vacation here in Bimini doing it just for fun. Watching the dolphins from the boat just for fun, seeing them underwater just for fun, and I get to absorb all of their joy and all of their appreciation for these incredible creatures. So I'm quite happy that I get to study dolphins.
I would agree. Go ahead. I don't know if somebody else was jumping in, but I, like you, Cal, I remember the very first time I swam with dolphins. I don't remember the first time I met dolphins because I think I was in grade school and it was at an aquarium, like maybe Mystic Aquarium, but I'm not 100% sure about that memory. But I do remember in 1991 when I first got in the water, I remember everything about the water, the warmth of the water, the individuals that were playing there. I can play the whole thing out in my brain. It will be the one video that I don't have video of, you know, as data, but I will, it's in my brain. I can see it now as I'm talking about it. And I remember, for the most part, each of the first times for the other groups of animals that I studied, and looking at them. And as I've said to you, or maybe some other folks, is I feel like there's two of me. Maybe I'm a split personality, is that there's this kid that's having a blast, and then there's the scientist in me that is trying to be objective and to collect everything and to try really hard not to change the behavior of the animals for what I'm observing. You know, I think that's what I would add, but you know, and I too love what I do, so it's not work.
I was gonna jump in. Oh, go ahead, Diana.
No, you go first. It's okay.
I was just gonna talk about the project we're doing together. I'm working with Dolphin Communication Project, and we're actually looking at people's connections to dolphins and how that relates to how they feel about the environment in general, whether it's swimming with dolphins or basically we were looking at tourist beliefs and perceptions about dolphins and how they feel about programs where dolphins are. We've been looking at dolphins under managed care. So I know Kel and Kathleen focused a lot about the interactions with seeing a wild dolphin, but even that connection, animals that are in managed care in a zoo or an aquarium are also ambassadors, and people get this strong connection or this emotional feeling, and that can translate into helping the environment or changing their attitudes or perceptions about conservation, and thinking about how to save, or not save, but how to better support marine conservation in general, I guess. So kind of looking at swimming with dolphins as one group of people that maybe are more apt to be environmentally friendly in the first place, but yeah, they did change their behavior. They talked to friends about marine conservation. They went out and they actively searched for scientific information about marine animals, including dolphins. They maybe stopped using plastic bags. They stopped using straws. They used reusable water bottles. So there were changes in their behavior just based on their connection they had with seeing these dolphins or getting to interact with dolphins in a program. And so that's a little bit more about managed care. I know that Kel and Kathleen were talking about dolphins in the wild for sure, but seeing an animal maybe in a zoo or an aquarium, you also maybe have that connection. Dolphins are a really special species where humans do feel that emotional connection. And as scientists, we're interested now, maybe how is that tied into conservation? I know that's something you're also interested in, Diana, so if you want to jump in.
Yeah, just briefly, I think, you know, when you're talking about that connection, and remember, we talked about them as having big brains. They have the second largest brain to us in comparison with their body size. These are big, intelligent, social dolphins. And, you know, when you come into contact with them, as you said, either in an aquarium or in the wild, and they're curious like we are. We're two social, big brain mammals looking at each other, and you sort of feel that connection. I felt it as Kathleen and you said, and all of us have said. And I think that's riveting in many ways. And again, even though we don't know that much about them yet, we're probably still in the infancy. I think we know that they do need protection. And just for everybody there, I mean, we're concerned about the numbers to keep the populations healthy. But when you meet a dolphin and you look into its eye, and you really feel like you want to protect those individuals, and that gets into welfare. Caring about the individuals and the well-being of individuals is important too. It's not just the numbers game. And I think that many of us who are scientists are trying to take our science and translate it into policy decisions so we get protection for these animals, not just in one country or another, but all over. And I think that's a dream I certainly have, which is to get global protection for dolphins and whales. And hopefully we'll get to that. I know we have a lot of things to worry about right now with the virus, and we're watching out for our families and people around us and our pets, but we want to keep them high in mind too. So I'm hoping that we will attain that sometime. They really, you know, there's this old myth, Greek myth, that dolphins were saving sailors thrown overboard. And I think it's time for us to really try to save them right back. So I always like to put that out there.
I think that is excellent, and my timer dinged that it's almost time to wrap up, and by now you can probably hear my kids in the background not being so quiet anymore. But I wanted to end on two short questions. One I think is a cool one, and I'm not sure I ever thought about it before. Can a dolphin swim backwards?
Usually,
I've seen
no.
them do it on command. Like they've been trained to do it, right?
Yeah, like tail walks backwards.
Backwards.
But not actually swimming. But there are two species of cetacean, one dolphin, one not a dolphin, that can sort of swim a little bit backwards. And that would be transient killer whales. When they strand on shore to go after a seal or a sea lion, they have to sort of wriggle their body back. So it's not really swimming, as I would call it.
Because they've got the ground under, they're making contact with something. Yeah.
Yep. And then also, and that's called intentional strand feeding. And then belugas can sort of push themselves back a little bit, but that's also related to pebble beaches that they might rub on for sloughing skin.
Excellent. And then I think as our wrap up, if everyone wants a chance, Mallory is wondering what each of our favorite animals are. So I will start, and I feel obligated that my favorite animal is the Atlantic spotted dolphin. But then if you get me going, then I feel like it's tied with a lot of other things. I love the spotted eagle rays that I get to see here in Bimini. And when I was lucky enough to spend some time in Southern Africa, I was shocked at how I fell in love with hippos. So I would say Atlantic spotted dolphin, spotted eagle ray, and then a hippo. Justin, your favorite animal, sir?
Well, I mean, it has to be in the number one slot, dolphins and whales of all type. But number two, a strong number two, is dung beetles, which are the coolest animal. They can navigate by looking at the Milky Way. Like, that's the coolest thing. So dung beetles, number two, number one, dolphins.
I like it. Dee?
I would say rough-toothed dolphins, just from my experience working with them in the wild and in a captive setting. I really kind of fell in love with them, I guess.
Nice. Maria?
Well, I feel like I have to say hippos.
I'm still hippo.
Too. They're so big and so funny looking at times, but yet they're really fascinating, and stay tuned to hear more. But dolphins, of course, take a close second.
Diana, your favorite animal?
I would say both Pacific and bottlenose dolphins, just because I've had the most experience with those guys.
Would a Newfoundland, the dog, be third on the list?
Yeah, I do Newfie rescue, and I just got a new one in today. So Newfie for sure. They're water rescue dogs. So that's
Kathleen, we will wrap up with your favorite animal.
While I think dolphins are cool, and I can see myself studying no other species right now because I enjoy learning about them, I have to answer the question in two ways. One, my favorite individually identifiable animals are two beagles named Dixie and Baloo, who happen to share my home. But for my favorite animal, just in general, it would be the cheetah.
Ooh, cheetah. I like it.
Yep.
Well, thank you first and foremost to everyone who joined us today. And then especially thank you to our panel. The five of you answered this call quickly and fairly last minute, and you were game, and we appreciate your time and your answers and your conversation. Anyone who didn't catch the whole webinar or didn't catch last week's or had to leave early, you can find all of the recordings of our webinars on our website under the Education tab. You can also find them on our YouTube channel. It's very clever, Dolphin Communication Project, and you'll find it. You can also tune in to the podcast, the Dolphin Pod. Our next webinar is this Thursday. I'm going to mix it up and head back to pinnipeds, which are seals and sea lions. And one of our colleagues is going to share some stories about how leopard seals are coping with climate change in the Antarctic. And then next week, our friend Dr. Makacha and I are going to compare and contrast elephants and dolphins. So we'll see how they all measure up. And as you know, you can follow us on our website, stay in touch by email, our social media, and of course you can support us. We are happy to be able to do these webinars for free, but other things aren't so free, and running an organization isn't free, unfortunately. And these asterisk things are Adopt a Wild Dolphin program, memberships, t-shirts, things like that. We are still running our special Pay It Forward campaign. So for every $15 that someone spends on any of those things, you can choose, or DCP can choose for you, someone to receive a free electronic adoption kit. So that might go to an essential worker, or maybe you have a friend who is just having a really hard time, or just needs a pick-me-up. We would like to be able to spread the dolphin joy. So thank you again, everyone, for coming. Thank you to our panel. And I'm going to try and find the buttons in the midst of my two screens and my share screen to end the meeting. So thank you, everybody.